I am a professor of sociology. I teach in the Women and Gender Studies program, in the Criminology program, and in the Human Rights program. For the Women and Gender Studies courses, I'd say the biggest challenge is sort of preaching to the choir, because students that are already interested in Women and Gender Studies sign up for the course, and students that have preconceived notions about Women and Gender Studies tend to avoid them. So I would say it's probably already an interested audience that's taking the courses, and the biggest challenge would be to convey to a larger audience what Women and Gender Studies is and how it can be beneficial even if they don't know right off the bat what it is. Actually, a lot. You know, I think that the issues about women and gender studies are really important for the world in general, and I think they're especially important here at Webster because it really relates to the legacy of Webster, being founded by the Sisters of Loretto, having a mission of social justice, of educating underserved populations, which at the time was women. So I find that the idea just really rewarding in general. And then the students that tend to be interested in women and gender studies are usually really engaged. They're engaged in issues of social justice. They want to make the world a better place. And those are really, I mean, that's the most exciting kind of student to have. They want to be there, they want to hear what you have to say, they want to pick it up and then take it further. That's really rewarding. When I'm designing a class for a Women and Gender Studies program, I think you know, a lot of it depends on the learning outcomes for the Women and Gender Studies program as a whole. So when you're designing a new course for the program, you want to keep in mind the overall objective of the course and how it's going to meet the objectives of the program. So the program in general is really worried about, really concerned about teaching students critical thinking skills, teaching students the importance of gender, that's masculinity and femininity, and how we organize our social life. So the first thing that I would do is think about the topic and how to approach that from a gendered or feminist perspective. Just because there's, I mean, one course that I taught last semester was feminist criminology, and a field like criminology tends to be fairly male-dominated, and so that course was really interesting for me in a lot of ways, in part because it was kind of an accident the way that I taught it. The original instructor who was supposed to teach the course was going to teach a course called Women, Crime, and Law. And when I took the course over, I wanted to come at it from a different perspective, from a feminist perspective, and so I wanted it to be feminist criminology. And it ended up being a cross-listed course, so there were students who registered under Women, Crime, and Law and students who registered under feminist criminology. And it was interesting because students had a really different idea about what those courses would be. And so it was a time when I actually had an opportunity to not preach to the choir because there were students in that class that weren't expecting the F word, and it was really, I mean, it was kind of an engaging, fun experience. Well, I mean, in the classroom already, when there are students who are interested in the topic, my approach is always to challenge students no matter where they are. So first I have to assess where they are, and if they're already coming in with a lot of knowledge about gendered patterns and gendered behavior, then my objective is to show them the other side and challenge their beliefs, because it's about critical thinking, right? So not taking for granted the way things are. Otherwise, I work with the Women and Gender Studies Council to kind of spread the word about women and gender studies on campus, sponsoring events about domestic violence or sexual harassment, sponsoring events about masculinity, and various other topics that students might find interesting so that they can learn a little bit about the program. Has anything changed since when I started doing this? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by when I started doing this. So I came to Webster in 2007, and when I came to Webster, I started teaching in the Women and Gender Studies program, which at that time was a little bit different. So if I take that at the starting point, 2007. Since then, there have been some really tremendous changes. So, for example, since then, we've had a woman running for president. We had a female vice president candidate. Same-sex marriage is legal now. And those kinds of things are really tremendous social changes that have happened in a really short period of time. Yeah, actually, of course, right? We're always a product of our environment. So the courses, the programming at Webster always reflects kind of the interest of the student body. But the student body at Webster has always been interested in women and gender studies and in larger social issues. I would say that most recently the biggest change and influence in women and gender studies has been the student interest in LGBT studies. And that's, we've started to take that seriously, so we're starting thinking about a minor or a certificate in LGBT studies. And while that has been part of the curriculum, so talking about gay and lesbian issues has been part of a lot of classes, now we're looking into developing courses that are specifically focusing on sexual orientation, sexual identity, and those kind of gender identity issues. Is there anything that we teach that is no longer going to be important? Well, that's kind of the point of a lot of programs that are interested in educating people about the world. And I would say, if there were to come a time where gender was no longer powerfully influencing our behavior, there wouldn't really need to be much of a contemporary women and gender studies program, right? It could be historical, looking at the way that gender had functioned. However, I have to say it's not likely. Yeah. It's one of those categories, the way that gender influences social life is pretty pervasive. So I would be surprised if that changed. Otherwise, the topics that we talk about in women and gender studies, women and gender studies is an approach. So it's a way to talk about something that already exists. So you have a topic like history, and you approach it from a feminist lens or focusing on gender issues. So there's always going to be history or economics or political science or sociology, anthropology, and women and gender studies is going to approach all of those topics coming from the gendered lens. So frankly, the only thing that would make women and gender studies obsolete is if gender no longer became important in the way that we organize our lives. Yeah, that's what goes into course planning is kind of complicated. There's a whole realm of teaching and learning about best practices and how to teach and how students can learn. And it really, that whole literature talks about how important it is to tailor how you deliver the content to the student population and to that specific context. So there's not really one way that women and gender studies classes are delivered. However, it's quite common that women and gender studies classes engage in a lot of discussion, engage in a lot of reading, and engage in a lot of writing, because those are kind of the tools to help us communicate those kinds of ideas. So whenever I approach a women and gender studies course, that's kind of the first place that I start with are the readings. So what's the literature that students need to know in this field? And often there's a lot of it. So because there's a lot of reading, and I acknowledge that our students are often full-time workers and have a lot of other kinds of challenges, I know that it's not reasonable to expect that they can read all of it. So I usually modify the amount of reading to sort of spread it around. I almost always have some sort of group dynamics where the responsibility for the coursework is shared in some way, which frankly is another really feminist orientation to life in general. But so usually I'll have something where students break up parts of the reading and they're responsible for one part, and then they also, I encourage them to take responsibility for that, and they learn that section, they come back and then they teach the other students, because one of the best ways to learn is when you have to teach. Otherwise, I always try to emphasize some sort of practical application of the learning, because it's also important for students to see how what they're learning in the classroom is relevant to their own life. So I usually have them engage in some sort of experiential project, something where they have to do a media analysis and watch TV and analyze it, or think about their own sociological development and how gender played a role. Something like that links it to an experience that they've had in their life. When you're talking about the real world application of women and gender studies, most people don't directly go to a career path, right? So most people's association isn't like, oh, I'm going to do a job search and I'm going to look for, help wanted women and gender studies major. So that's not common. Mostly what we do is teach students, we give them tools to how to solve problems, how to analyze data, how to collect information. So most of our courses probably don't emphasize the direct, career applications of women and gender studies. However, because our students are really interested in making a difference in the world, our students usually pick that up and apply it in a specific social context. So we've had examples of majors in women in gender studies who have gone on to found nonprofit agencies, usually focused on educating girls or speaking out about domestic violence. We've had people go to the United Nations to work with the Commission on the Status of Women. We've had people go to refugee camps to work on ameliorating the plight of refugees. So we've had a lot of success stories. And then, we've had a lot of stories where people go into the corporate world, but they use this sort of feminist and gender lens to understand the dynamics in the workplace. I really do hope that students will take what they learn in the classroom and apply it in other parts of their lives. Well, typically women are more attracted to these courses than men, and I think a lot of that has to do, frankly, with the gender dynamics of social life in general. So the fact that the program is called Women in Gender Studies, some men can find alienating, and so the men that tend to be attracted to the program either are really comfortable with their own masculinity and their own sexuality, or they've been dragged to the class by a female friend, or there's something else that kind of brought them into the class. Or like in the case of the feminist criminology class that I mentioned, it was also cross-listed with a more benign title, and it sounded like it was going to be less feminist than it was. I think that part of the problem really is about the sort of stereotypes about what feminism is and what a feminist is. And I think that a lot of students, male and female, are afraid that they're going to be scolded, that they're going to be told they're wrong, that they're going to say that we're going to say you're not doing it right. And this is an institution of higher learning, and the point is about educating students. It's not about diminishing students. So it's one of those challenges that frankly people who work in the field of women and gender studies in the world face pretty regularly. It's not uncommon. Yeah, absolutely. And so when this program first started a million years ago, actually, it was called Women's Studies. And as we were putting it through the new curriculum, and that was when there was a minor and a certificate in Women's Studies. And when we introduced the new curriculum, we had some really serious discussions about what we should call the program and if it should still be called Women's Studies or if it should be called something else. And actually, there was a big push from a lot of people to just call it Gender Studies, because that's sort of more inclusive and that's kind of more broad. But frankly, our concern was that dropping women out of the equation is seriously problematic, because women still matter, and implying that they don't is a problem. So Well, I think those are two separate questions. Yeah. So what is the future of the degree path? I think this degree, we're all going to work together to make it include more global content, to make it include more intersectional content. So that's to include race, class, and gender into the discussion. I think those changes are probably coming soon. And then what can a student do with this kind of degree? Women in Gender Studies is one of those liberal arts degrees where the point is that you get engaged with the content and you get a broad-based education. So what you're learning with Women in Gender Studies are the skills, actually, that employers are looking for: critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, research skills, writing skills, oral communication skills. So the kinds of skills that are applicable in the workplace are going to be applicable just about anywhere, whatever the kind of workplace is. The difference is a major in Women in Gender Studies is going to have something that they're passionate about. So they're going to be focused on a particular kind of workplace. Generally, students are more interested in nonprofit work because they feel like the mission of a nonprofit organization engages with their kind of values a little bit better. Try it. Yeah, I understand. I know that there is a lot of fear about what Women in Gender Studies is, and people are just kind of unsure about what the program is or what the degree is. And so what I'm really saying is just try it. Try the intro level course. Try the first course, which gives you kind of a taste of what the degree program would be like. I'd say come and talk to professors that teach in the program. You know, students are always welcome to come talk to me and a number of other people that are involved in women and gender studies. We care about this degree program and we care about the students in the degree program. So one of the things that I would say, if a student is worried about women and gender studies, to come and talk to one of us and tell us why they're worried, and then we'll fix it. Well, the intro class is going to be a broad class for students. That's really going to be giving students the perspective on what women and gender studies is. Otherwise, students often find women and gender studies by accident because we cross-list a lot of courses. So there are a lot of courses in a major that actually have women and gender studies content, and so we'll cross-list those courses to kind of signal that that's a women and gender studies course. That's usually how students end up finding us. So I would say, you know, seek out some content that engages with women and gender studies and see what you think. Well, I don't know that if what I did would be called an internship. It was actually a postdoc. I did a postdoctoral study. I was a public policy fellow in the UCLA School of Law at the Williams Institute for Sexual Orientation. Oh, wait, let me see. I'm not sure if I remember what it's called. I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Williams Institute for Sexual Orientation, Law, and Public Policy. So sort of in the high academic level, a postdoc is kind of like an internship for academics. That's probably the closest that I had. Mm-hmm. We have had students who have done internships. We have a really strong relationship with RAVEN, that stands for Rape and Violence and Now. It's an anti-violence organization designed to rehabilitate domestic violence offenders. We've had lots of students go through internship programs where they work with RAVEN on the kinds of issues that engage with rehabilitating domestically violent people. There are other opportunities for internships. It's just sort of on a case-by-case basis. So when students are interested in a particular topic, they usually approach a professor and then we find a place that fits what they're interested in doing. It's not that bad. I know it sounds scary, but it's not that scary. Not scary people. Feminists are people too.
I am in the audio production major here at Webster, and I chose it because, I mean, I love music, I love electronics, and they're the only two things that put them together, but I also know that there are not a lot of women in this field, so I just kind of want to pave the way. I did take it as a requirement for my major, but it also was helpful to me to understand like the perspective of women and how we are viewed in the world, because in my field I am one of like 40 women. Like there's not a lot. So, you know, being able to understand kind of the methodology, like the what's the word I'm looking for? The knowledge, having the knowledge to go out into the world and apply this to where I am, because it's all men. There's all men in my field, so it was a nice perspective change. Yeah, because here at school we only have one woman that's an audio professor, and she's kick-ass. So like just having, like, even just gave me the confidence to go out and use what I know to kind of build my confidence, show that I am worth the time and the effort, and not letting myself be pushed around, and just understanding that I do have a place. So it was cool. We had one guy and 23 girls, because it was like a class of 25 of us. It was huge.
Was that ever a problem, would you say?
It could be sometimes. He was a little more towards the feminine side of, he was homosexual, but he still kind of understood the manly point of view, and then like still understood the womanly point of view. But when the man came out, then the women would attack. So. Yeah. No, but you have to realize that you are in a room full of women who are real gun-ho about you treating them fairly, and you're gonna get backlash because you have male parts, no matter what. mostly because of, it was part of my major, like, requirement, but, it just, I have a different perspective on how, like, people are viewed in the world, as well as women, because, I mean, it is women, studies, but it's also gender studies, so the gender part of it was something new for me. Because I also have friends who are of different genders and classified as different gender types, and their way of their perspective and the way they think. So that's kind of what the class taught me, how to be kind of unbiased.
Yeah.
I mean, I am more aware of the transsexual community than I was before I took the class. So I learned the importance of, like I said, their perspective and the way their culture works and the struggles they have to go through, and just the mental and physical, and like the emotional, mental, and physical, like, struggles they have to go through every day. And that applies to just my life in general. As far as my major, it applies more to, like, as a woman being physically, like, or being emotionally and mentally strong, and understanding that, you know, just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're any less. We did a lot of papers about, we did a lot of analysis on women and their culture. We had watched this movie called Jig, and it's about girls in Irish jig dancing, and the massive amount of makeup they have to wear for this, and how, like, makeup and how that induces into how you physically feel about yourself, and what kind of implications come along with that, like why you have to wear the makeup, why you have to wear the dress and the wig, and all the jewelry, and look like a girl, and act like a girl, and do all this stuff. So I thought that was kind of cool. She did a lot of Disney,
Any princess stuff?
yeah, lots of princess stuff, anti-princess stuff mostly. She really is not a big fan of Disney, but
A lot of people aren't.
yeah. But I mean, like, she was real gung-ho about how they treat women and how they view women in the world, and how they view people of different genders, and we watched a lot of videos, so many videos about that kind of stuff, so it was interesting. Medium. I mean, you did a lot of papers, but it wasn't like mind-numbing or anything like that. Many, because I have a lot of friends who are in that program, and a lot of them are like homosexual, like they classify that, and they have different genders and stuff like that, and they really like the classes. They're really in depth in everything, and a lot of them are in, like, the BASS Club, which is the Behavioral and Association of Social Science, and like the Women's Collective has their own, like, kind of club thing. So I mean, they really like it. They think it's important, and because that's what they want to do with their lives. So. It is inclusive to everyone,
Okay.
but unfortunately, they make it, the department itself makes it inclusive to everyone. Everyone should take a class like this, so they understand the perspective, but unfortunately, most of the people who end up taking the classes are of that kind of stereotype. And it's sad. Just in general, that it's important that you know, we are, sorry, we are such a closed-minded society, and we can't change anything if we don't understand the perspective of anybody else. So this is important for any major, any career path, because you're going to come across people of all kinds in different situations. And if you can't figure out how to interact with those people, it's never change, and just stuff in general is never going to work. Most of the content that they present to you, you can find, but not easily. And it's not like any of these professors are just women's studies. Like Andrea Miller, she's a sociology professor. And that goes all of those things go into women and gender studies. And I mean, you can't find Jig if you don't know what it is. Like, that's a movie that on Netflix that nobody knows about. And like, it's important to understand that these people, the professors go to school for this stuff. You can't just, I mean, you can find that stuff online, but you're just going to base an opinion off what you read online, and not everything online is true. So if you go and talk and actively put yourself in those situations, then you will understand more. Prepare for a lot of discussion, active, hard discussion, because that's what you're going to get. Be prepared to come up with, prepare yourself not to be biased. Keep an open mind when you do these classes, because everybody's background is different, and the questions that she makes, that people make you answer, and the thoughts that she provokes in you are going to be like, I mean, they're going to be thought-provoking, so I mean, just prepare yourself for some hard stuff. No regrets. I feel like I've been more educated. I would take another class.